So before we get started on today's session, just a little bit of an insight into what's ahead for all of us this month, being Mental Health Month as well. So on Monday, we have, as in next Monday, we have Movember joining us, and they're going to present a really interactive session around conversations and opening up an interactive approach to mental health, but also LSV is going to be supporting Movember this year with a fundraising team. So if you want to get involved in that, I'm going to pop that link into the chat line now. Please circulate it with your teams and sign up to our LSV Movember fundraising team, and then next Monday we will talk about that a little bit more, obviously, with the Movember teams. And then at the end of the month, we have our upcoming Blue Connection session, a really, really timely one around design thinking and adapting and innovation in recovery. So as you know, our pool's open, we prepare for our life-saving flags to go back up. Greg, who is from Melbourne Business School and the founder of Rhythm Effect, he's going to take us through that really powerful session. So bookings are still open for that. So please jump on if you are free. Then finally, to stay up to date with all these opportunities and also to look back at our recorded sessions, we have our webpage. We've got our social media pages, of course, and of course your team app as well. But that brings us, excuse me, to today's session, and I am thrilled to welcome Sane Australia Peer Ambassador, Eleanor Danks. Now, a peer ambassador for Sane shares their personal experience of living with or supporting someone with a complex mental illness. They also help develop, deliver and evaluate Sane's programs and services. Ellie works part-time as a lawyer and as a life coach, and she became a peer ambassador for Sane Australia in 2014, which she absolutely loves. Ellie has also asked me to advise you that she's really happy for you to have your cameras on for this session, as Ellie will have hers on and I will have mine on. And please, throughout, type them into the chat line or pop your hand up. But as Ellie moves through these her presentation, she'd love to also see your face. So with that, my camera goes on. I will stop presenting and I will welcome Ellie.
Hello, thank you so much for the introduction, Sheila, and hello everyone who's joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're all going well, working from home or wherever you are in Victoria. Before we get started, I would like to just do a quick acknowledgement of country. So I work and live on the border of Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri land. Both of those are part of the Kulin Nation. And I would like to just continue to recognise our First Nations peoples' continuing connection to the land, water and culture, and give my respects to any elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that we may or may not have on this call with us or looking back on the recording. So before I get started, I'm just going to give a little bit of a content warning. I am, as you know, going to be talking about themes about mental illness, in particular anxiety, but I'm also going to tell you about my story with mental illness, which involves a few other aspects as well. So if at any time throughout this discussion you need to take a break or you need to leave, please feel free to do so. I will not take any offence whatsoever. And if otherwise, I really encourage you to just take some time after the presentation to just give yourself some space to reflect, feel anything that comes up, and love yourself through it. Okay? So today I'm going to tell you a bit about my personal story, and then I'm going to talk about specifically anxiety and how you can support both yourself and anyone else, a colleague, a family member, a friend or whatever who's experiencing anxiety as well. So my name is Eleanor. Like Sheila said, I'm a peer ambassador for Sane Australia, which means that I share my lived experience both with Sane and with other organisations to spread awareness, I guess, and help combat stigma against mental illness as well. I am a practicing lawyer. I currently work in a community legal centre doing basically anything that walks in the door, but I have experience in criminal prosecution, refugee law, Indigenous law. I'm also a part-time life coach. I'm transitioning out of law and into life coaching, and I predominantly work with women who are wanting to connect back with their bodies, a mix of mindset work and somatic techniques to help them do that. So my journey with mental illness began when I was quite young. I was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety when I was 13 years old, so in year 8. However, my experience was really that I was suffering from both of those for quite a while before I got diagnosed. I then went and did all the right things. My beautiful parents got me into a very good psychologist. I went to therapy every week. I tried medications. I tried hypnosis. I tried basically everything that you've heard of probably to treat mental illness. And unfortunately, nothing worked for me. So this is when my diagnosis shifted to treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, which means that it's something that treatment doesn't appear to work with. And I was told that I would probably live with depression and anxiety for my whole life, which wasn't something that I was willing to accept, I guess. And it was quite severe at times. I experienced a lot of suicidal thoughts, self-harming behaviors, all of those things. And I think it's important to acknowledge that for me, it was never that I didn't want to live. It was that I didn't want to, I had all these amazing, phenomenal dreams for what my life would look like. And I didn't see how they were possible when I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And that's where the tension was. So eventually, when I was 21, about 2 days after my 21st birthday, I voluntarily admitted myself to a private psychiatric hospital, and I stayed there for 5 weeks. For me, this was really a final go at finding something that would work. So I admitted myself because I was very unwell, but also so that with the assistance and in the circumstances of a private hospital, I could try all these different medications in a much faster way than I would have been able to outside of hospital. Over the 5 weeks that I was in there and the year following that, I tried over 15 different medications, none of which made any difference to my depression or my anxiety, and most of which gave me pretty insane side effects. So it was a pretty hard period. At the end of that year, my psychiatrist then recommended basically that I had tried everything, and the next step was to undergo ECT or TMS, which is Electroconvulsive Therapy, which is what you see in all the old horrible asylum movies, or TMS, which is a very similar thing except using magnets instead of shocks. So at this point, my mum stepped in and said, there's no way that you're shocking my child. And my mum is a doctor. Both of my parents are doctors, and they both went to town trying to find reasons why I should not go through this treatment. And my mum found a research article that said, if you have ever had a seizure, you shouldn't go through either of these treatments. It's too dangerous for your brain. And I had had a seizure when I was 8 years old. And so my mum grabbed this and she was like, see, it's dangerous. We can't do it, blah, blah, blah. And instead got me in to see an epilepsy specialist and said, we need to sort this out before you undergo through any more treatment. And when I saw the epilepsy specialist, I gave him my history. I sat down, he asked me a bunch of questions. He ended up diagnosing me with temporal lobe epilepsy. At this stage, it was estimated that I was having about 10 to 20 seizures every day. The seizures that I have are they're not grand mal seizures. So I don't lose consciousness. I don't fall to the ground and shake like you see in movies. I have a whole bunch of weird neurological things that happen that I had always been told were just weird neurological things that were happening and were nothing to be concerned about. So once I had this diagnosis, over the next 2 years, it was all about finding medication that worked and helped and blah, blah, blah. But the result was, when I found medication that actually stopped all these seizures, my depression and anxiety basically, the medication acted how I'd always been told antidepressants should act. That it wouldn't fix everything, but it would lift that cloud, it would lift that baseline. And that's what had never happened to me before, but happened to me as soon as they were able to stop my seizures. And, you know, how these two interact is probably not suitable for this conversation. It goes on for a while, but basically they think that my epilepsy perhaps caused my depression and anxiety. The fact that I was continuing to have seizures was probably exacerbating both of them. And more so, it was stopping any medication from working, because every seizure would shuffle up my brain chemistry all over again and stop any effects that the antidepressants were trying to do. So after this, it really became, like I said, that cloud. It really felt like a cloud just lifted off of my body, and I could see clearly, I could feel things that I had never felt before. It was like I was a whole new person. But this was only when I was 23. So I had basically lived my entire life as a depressed person and as an anxious person. And so then what it became about was really learning how to change the way that I thought, the way that I acted, the way that I reacted to things, because the way that my body and my mind had learnt to interact with the world was through the eyes of a depressed person. So that took a few years, more than a few years, but eventually I got there. So I no longer have a diagnosis of depression or anxiety. However, a few years after all of that happened, when I was about 25, I experienced some trauma in a relationship, and I developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, for anyone who knows what PTSD is, it's the same thing except with a few extra symptoms. And my experience of CPTSD was again this anxiety, this panic, this fear, but it was so physical. Everything, all of my symptoms, I could feel my heart beating in like the tips of my fingers and my toes. Like it was like my whole body was beating. If someone tapped me on the shoulder, I would burst into tears and like dive under the desk. I had nightmares, I had flashbacks, the whole caboozle. And the overwhelming feeling for me was this feeling, that constant feeling of not being safe. And what ended up happening was that it actually really helped me start to view anxiety, or, you know, anxiety, worry, panic, all of these kind of like sub feelings within this umbrella term of anxiety. It really helped me start to view them in a different way. And that way is now what I teach my clients. It's now what I talk about in these presentations, of learning to view anxiety as an underlying feeling of not being safe. Okay, so if we think about what actually happens when we feel anxious, or what actually happens when we have a panic attack, basically what is happening is our brain is detecting a threat, whether that's a real threat, whether it's a perceived threat, whether it's a physical or emotional threat, whatever it is, it's detecting a threat, and then it's releasing all these chemicals based on that threat. This is what we call the fight, flight, or freeze response, that our brain releases these chemicals. It releases adrenaline, cortisol, all these different stress chemicals that put all of our energy into the outer extremities of our body, so our arms, our legs, our lungs, that helps us run away from the threat or fight the threat. And the thing is, though, that our brains actually, our brains don't have eyes. So our brains don't actually know the difference between a physical threat, like a bear standing right in front of us, or an emotional threat of, you know, someone, a loved one, you know, a partner breaking up with us perhaps, or a perceived threat of something that for some reason we think is dangerous, but is not dangerous in the all of those things, our brain doesn't know the difference between. So it just has this blanket response of this is a threat, and this is the response that our body's going to go into because of that. And sometimes this can result in a panic attack. Sometimes it can result in just this underlying anxiety. Sometimes it's as simple as just this underlying like niggling worry that is at the back of your mind. But it's all the same thing. It's all our brain detecting this real or perceived threat and then helping us, like it's trying to look after us. It's trying to say like, hey, there's this threat. We need to do this thing to survive. And I think that, you know, if we look at the current circumstances that our world is in, it makes so much sense when you think of anxiety as this underlying feeling of not being safe. It makes so much sense as to why basically every single one of us probably is feeling some level of anxiety. And just before I jumped on this, I actually looked up, I don't know if anyone's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like this triangle, and these there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these different needs that we, and it's the understanding is that we need the bottom one before we can move to the next one. And so if we look at those needs, the bottom is physiological. So things like we need food, we need shelter, those types of things. The next one is safety. So we need to be physically safe. We need to not have that bear in front of us or whatever it is. The next one is love and belonging. The next one is esteem. And the final one is self-actualization. And the theory is that we can't reach self-actualization until we've had these other needs met. And if we look at the current circumstances, basically, probably not so much self-actualization, but basically all of those needs are potentially being threatened at the moment. You know, our physical safety, that there's this mystery virus going around that we don't know who's got it, we can't see who's got it, all those things. Amazing, Sheila. So Sheila's just put it in the comments. So this virus threatens our physiological needs. It threatens our safety, our job security threatens our safety, our financial safety, which is obviously so important to our wellness overall. We look at the next one of love and belonging. At the moment, well, thank goodness we're allowed to go 25 kilometers now, but for so long, we haven't been able to go further than 5Ks. For me, that's meant that I haven't seen my friends since July. And you know, that affects that, our need for love and belonging, our esteem. If you've lost your job, you're probably feeling pretty crappy about yourself right now. All of these things are affected at the moment. And so it creates this inherent feeling of uncertainty. And in that uncertainty is this feeling of, I don't know if I'm safe. I don't know if my relationships are safe, whether I'm physically safe, whether I'm financially safe. And all of those things are being acknowledged by your brain as threats, and they're starting these processes. So, yeah, and I think what often can happen in people who struggle with clinical level anxiety is they actually get anxious about being anxious. So a lot of people who suffer from panic attacks, quite often the thing that is the lasting anxiety is this fear that they're going to have another panic attack. And so you can see it's like this cycle, and it's being fed of like, if I have a panic attack, what if I'm in the middle of a supermarket? What's that going to mean? Am I going to be safe? And that feeds the next one. Okay. Yeah. So if we start off with this understanding that anxiety is a manifestation of not feeling safe, the next bit that we need to acknowledge or understand is that anxiety, or how this manifests, can look and feel different for every single one of us. There is, of course, a typical way that an anxious person acts, or that, you know, you see in movies, or all of those things. There's how we view someone as looking when they're having a panic attack. I once had a panic attack in an elevator when I was in college, and I was with one of my good friends, and I grabbed her arm and I said, I'm having a panic attack. And she looked at me and said, I would never have been able to tell that you are anxious unless you had just told me. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge this, that anxiety looks and feels different on us. And the first level of that is what makes us feel unsafe is very dependent on our personal past experiences and our personal life. Okay, so for example, I don't really get anxious about work. I get nervous before I do a speech, or I might get nervous before I go to court, but it's not this like anxiety of like, I feel like I'm in danger. Where I really feel it is in relationships, in friendships, in romantic relationships, and it really comes out there. And that's obviously based on my experiences growing up in past romantic relationships where something has made me feel unsafe. Okay, so just because someone doesn't feel anxious in the same way that you do, or if they feel anxious to do with something that you're like, I would never feel anxious about that, doesn't mean that it's not valid, I guess. The second thing is that it looks different on every single person and feels different for every single person. And a really good way of remembering this or understanding this is remembering that when these threats are detected, it throws our body into a fight, flight, or freeze reaction, okay? And this chemically is the same for all of us, but whether we go into fight or flight or freeze is very different for all of us. Sometimes this depends on the situation, but more so it depends again on our past experiences, on our learned behaviors and stuff like that. So for someone who has a greater tendency to go into that fight reaction, this is where you might see people who have really angry outbursts where they snap at you when they're feeling anxious. For me, that's with my parents. If I'm feeling anxious and my parents like encroach on that, I snap at them, okay? Or that general like irritability that it's like they're always angry, they're always upset. The second one is flight. Okay, so this might be the person who avoids anything that makes them feel anxious, or they run away from situations. If a relationship makes them feel anxious, they just leave the relationship. Or they withdraw themselves, that, you know, they'll go really quiet. You'll notice that this usual happy and bubbly person hasn't spoken for the past half hour, okay? And the final one is freeze, and this is just like that complete inability to do things. I used to get this a lot in uni when I was writing essays that I left way too late, and then I would start panicking about whether or not I could write, you know, 5,000 words in 2 hours. Not 2 hours, it was never that bad, but and I would panic, and it would literally feel like I couldn't even move my fingers to type. Like my whole body would just freeze. And this is also really common in a lot of trauma situations. People often freeze because it's like for some reason your body thinks that that is the safest thing for you to do, okay? So if you've got any questions on all of that, please feel free to ask them in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. But with all of this said, I want to take you through some steps or some steps that I use personally with myself. I also use it with my clients, and I also use it with basically anyone in my life. And these are steps that I actually use them when it comes to any emotion that we perceive as being negative. So if we're feeling sadness, if we're feeling jealousy, anxiety, anything, but I think it's really particularly helpful when it comes to anxiety. So there's 4 steps, and I'll go through them one by one, but it's important to remember I'm going to take you through them sequentially, but they can kind of sometimes be interwoven, that you'll need to look at one and then go back to another, and I'll explain that as we go as well. And typically the first 3 will need to occur before the last one, which I'll also go through. So I'm going to explain the steps to you and then give you some examples. Once I've finished all of them, I'm going to give you an example of how I might use all of them together personally when I'm feeling anxious. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of when an employer has actually used them with me. completely unbeknownst to them. But looking back, this is definitely the things that they covered in their reaction. So the first step, actually, I'll go through all 4 steps are safety, awareness, acceptance, and aligned action. Okay, so starting with the first one, safety. This is particularly important with anxiety. As we've just explained, anxiety is this manifestation of not feeling safe. So the absolute number one thing that you can do for yourself or anyone else, if anxiety is what they are feeling, is help them feel safe. Okay, but this is also the case for any negative emotion or any emotion really. We're quite often taught growing up that negative emotions are not okay. That either it's not appropriate for us to be feeling them, or that they're really scary. That quite often we feel this idea of like, if I let myself feel this anger, for example, what if it never goes away? What if it just takes over my entire body and then I die on the floor? Like, it's this very it's scary, it's not okay, it's bad. Okay, and so quite often it's really important to remind ourselves that it is actually safe to feel emotions, whatever that emotion is. And you know, sometimes with anxiety, which I'll go through in the next step of awareness, but anxiety may not actually be the core emotion that you're feeling. It may be that you're feeling something else and you don't want to feel that, so you're feeling anxiety instead. So the first thing that I think is really important to know and really helpful to know is that every single emotion is a chemical reaction in our brain. And that reaction, from when it's triggered to when it's fully complete in our body, if left unimpeded, only takes 90 seconds. So if you trigger an anxiety response and nothing re-triggers it, it will only ever last for 90 seconds. And so when we know that, it becomes more about, okay, this process is going on in my body. How can I just let it happen, as opposed to re-triggering it? So often we re-trigger it because we loop, we feel anxious, then we start thinking about what we feel anxious about, and then that like triggers the response all over again. Okay, so remembering that it only lasts for 90 seconds, and every single one of us can survive 90 seconds of any emotion that we're feeling. Okay, so ways that you can make yourself feel safe. The first one is you can either go top down, so working from your mind, or you can go bottom up of working from your body. So if we work with our mind, this is things like actually saying out loud or in your head, I am safe. It is okay. I am not in danger. The other thing, like things like looking around the room and like naming things that are around you, being like, there's a green plant here. It has brown edges on the side. So things that like kind of like distract your mind so that the process can just happen. But saying things like, I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. And then the other way is that we work from the body up. Okay, so these are things that you can actually physiologically do that will help your nervous system actually switch back from that fight or flight response back into that rest and digest and calm response. So the two main ones that I like to work with are breathing and touch. So touch works because kind of two ways. One, it distracts the mind. So if you're touching things, you're giving your mind something else to pay attention to. So that 90-second cycle can just go on in the background and you're not re-triggering it. The other way that it works though is that it brings you back into your body, which helps your body switch back to rest and digest. So if you're helping yourself, you might just, squeeze your arms or squeeze your legs. You might want to touch, if you're sitting on a rough chair, just touching the material on the chair. The other thing that you can do is stroking your arms like this. This is called havening, and it actually, I won't go into how it works, but it switches your brain back into rest and digest mode, okay? It will take a little while, but it makes so much sense now why we all like someone like stroking us when we're upset. Okay, and the other one is breathing. So 3 really good breathing techniques that physiologically make that switch. The first one is nostril breathing. So you block one nostril, you breathe in, and then you swap nostrils and you breathe out. And then breathe in, swap again, and breathe out. Okay, and just continue to do this as long as you need to. The second one is what I call box breathing. So you breathe in through the nose for 4 counts. So in, 2, 3, 4, and then hold for 4, and then exhale through the mouth for 4, and hold for 4. And any of these breaths, you typically need 6 to 8 breaths where you're doing it properly. So if you're really anxious, it might take you a few breaths to get into it, and then you do 6 to 8 breaths. And that's how long it takes for your body to switch back. The final one is breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, but breathing out for double the amount of time as you breathed in. So for example, breathing in for 3 and out for 6. And then once you've got that, you might move into breathing in for 4 and out for 8, in for 5, out for 10, etc. However, whatever length feels comfortable for you. Okay, so these are all things that you can do to feel safe. If you're in a circumstance where you're supporting someone else, the most important thing that you can do is help them do any of these things, okay? So obviously this depends a bit on what your relationship is with the person. If it's a close friend, then you can just do the exact same thing as you would with yourself. If it's, you know, someone who's your employee or something, you might it might not be appropriate to start stroking their arms, but it's basically the same thing. Physically and verbally tell them that they are safe, and also show them. So for example, take them into a private room away from other people, sit them down, give them a glass of water, keep telling them that they're safe, that it's okay. Something that I think is really important in employment circumstances is telling them that that you don't mind that they're feeling that way. I think quite often if we feel anxious in a work situation, we assume that it's going to affect our job or it's going to affect our relationship with our boss. Like it's embarrassing, which it should never be, but it is. And so if you're in that situation, saying to them, you know, even maybe saying like, I experience anxiety myself, it's okay. Saying things that will help them feel that their job is safe despite the fact that they're feeling this way. Distract them so that the emotion can run its course. And if appropriate, you can help them do a breathing exercise or make physical touch with them. And just make sure that you ask them before you make physical touch with them. Say, do you mind if I put my hand on your shoulder? Would you like a hug? Is it okay if I touch you? Make sure that you're always asking for consent. So the next step is awareness. And, you know, the safety step when it comes to anxiety is will usually be enough to actually settle the anxiety down. But then if we don't do the next steps, the anxiety will most likely come back because you're not actually figuring out what's going on with it. Okay, so the safety step is probably the only one you need in like an emergency situation where you're like, I just need to calm the hell down. The safety step is your go-to step. These other steps are what you do in the moment or later, so you understand what's going on. So the next step is awareness. So bringing awareness to what we're actually feeling. So quite often we don't actually know what emotion we're feeling. Our mind jumps to emotions that we know and feel comfortable with. And stereotypically, for women, this is anxiety or sadness. And for men, it's more often anger. Okay, so quite often, some of you might have experienced, if you're a male or if you have a male in your life, you might have experienced a male getting really angry suddenly about something when you're like, you're not angry about this, you're sad because your dog just died, or you're anxious because you've got a job interview. So we jump to these emotions that we're comfortable with and we understand. So it's really important to actually start bringing awareness to what is the actual emotion that I'm feeling. If I think that I'm feeling anxious, is there something underneath that? What is making me feel anxious? So the how of how you do this is naming one, what you're feeling, so what emotion it is, and something that can really help with this if you struggle is called a what's it called? A wheel of emotions. You can just Google it, and it's this big wheel that has these like core emotions in the middle, and then it gives all of these other names of different emotions that kind of come out from that. So it means that you can actually look at it and be like, okay, I'm feeling anxious, but like, am I feeling worried? Am I feeling confused? Am I feeling frustrated? And it gives you all of these examples so that you can really try and pinpoint what it is you're feeling. And the second one is how it feels in your body. Okay, so where am I feeling anxious in my body? Is it in my chest? Is it in my palms? Is it in my toes? Wherever it is. And just remembering through all of this to not judge it, which we'll get into in the next step, but it's just awareness. Okay. So with someone else, the exact same thing, asking them how they're feeling. And if you think that they're feeling something different to what they're saying, helping them dig a little deeper, helping them, in the circumstance of anxiety, being like, okay, you're feeling anxious. What is it that you're feeling anxious about? Okay, what is underneath that? Are you feeling anxious because, yeah, thank you, Sheila. Are you feeling anxious because you're actually concerned about this specific thing? Are you feeling anxious because you're actually feeling sad and you don't like feeling sad? Just helping them to understand. And again, reminders of that safety might be needed through this step. Sometimes it can be really scary to acknowledge how we're actually feeling. And so just reminding yourself or reminding the other person that it's safe, nothing bad is going to happen to them. They're not in physical danger. So the next step is acceptance. And this is what I said about just completely removing all judgment around what is going on. When things happen in our life, when we feel things, when things happen external to us, our natural reaction is to label it because we want to understand it. We want to categorize things as good or bad or happy or sad or whatever it is. And when things happen, we either do one of two things. The first one is that we accept it as it is and we allow it to happen, or we resist it. And the reasons why we can resist things, there are lots of reasons, but it's the same thing for emotions. If we're feeling sadness, we can either be like, I'm feeling sadness. That's just what I'm feeling, and allow that to happen. Or we can be like, oh, I'm feeling sadness, but I don't want to feel sadness because that makes me weak, or I don't want to think about what's behind the sadness, or all of these different things. So the aim with this step, and that resistance will be something that loops that reaction, and you'll get stuck in it, whether that's, subconscious or whether that's outward. So the aim in this is to just completely remove all judgment, all labels, and just say, I'm feeling anxious. That's neither good or bad. It simply is. It's completely neutral. It's just something that is happening to me. And if you can, the next amazing step to this step is thanking it or being grateful for it. So with anxiety, being like, thank you, mind, for, notifying me that there is something going on that I feel threatened by. Or thank you, anger, for letting me know that there is something that I need to look at. Like what's the purpose of the emotion, and how can you thank it for giving you that message? But if you can't do the gratitude step, just start with the complete non-judgment step. Okay. And again, when you're supporting someone else, it can be reminding them, this is just a feeling. It's fine. It doesn't mean anything. It can also mean reminding them or showing them that you accept them regardless of the feeling that they're feeling. Saying, you know, this doesn't change my opinion of you. Like showing them that you still accept them and this emotion that they're experiencing, this anxiety, actually that you view it as neutral. It doesn't change your perception of them as a person. Okay, so then the final step is aligned action. So in some circumstances, the aligned action may be simply to just do the other steps, and that's all that's needed. In some circumstances, what's needed is to just feel it, bring awareness to it, love it, and then it kind of like dissipates as a result of that. But other circumstances, particularly with anxiety, I find that there is an action that can be taken because the anxiety is trying to give you a message that you don't feel safe. So it might be about bringing about an actual change. It might be acknowledging this anxiety is continuing to come up and I need to get some support for it. It might be saying, I need to take a day off. That's what my body and my mind are asking for. Yeah, so it's about thinking about what needs to happen from this to, I guess, to stop it happening again, or to bring about the change that it's asking me to do. Yeah, and again, this is probably obvious if you do it with yourself. It's just about that reflection of acknowledging, like, what am I actually anxious about and what needs to change. If it's with someone else, it's helping them do that process. So I'm just conscious of time, but I think it'll be useful for me to give you these examples. Are we okay for time, Sheila? Okay, perfect. So I want to give you an example first of how I do this on my own. So say I start feeling really anxious. If I feel like a panic attack going on, or if I can feel myself, more commonly what will happen is that I won't have panic attacks anymore, but I'll feel that fight or flight response. I'll feel it in my body. I might start that I'm starting to I might notice, that I'm starting to snap at people or whatever. So the first thing that I do is that I will take myself into a private space. I'll take myself away from, anyone or anything else. And I'll create safety in my body. So I'll do some deep breathing. And, the great thing about deep breathing is that you can actually do it in a room full of people and no one will probably notice that you're doing anything weird. But if you go away, you can it helps just zone in that safety. So I'll do the breathing exercises. I'll do the havening. I will, often I'll be like, is there something that actually needs to be felt? Like, do I need to cry? Do I need to, punch a pillow or something? Is there something that actually wants to come out? Then I'll ask myself, what am I actually feeling? Okay, am I feeling anxiety? Or is it that I'm feeling sadness, but I didn't feel comfortable in that room to feel sadness? And so I started feeling unsafe, which led to the anxiety. Really kind of like digging down. A question that I love to ask people is like, okay, so what are you feeling? I'm feeling anxious. Okay, if you picture that anxiety and just picture it moving to the side, is there something below it? Like, what is below the anxiety? And then really creating that picture of like, okay, we just move that to the side. What's underneath it? And often this really helps me and other people to kind of be like, oh, this is actually underneath it. Oh, this is underneath it. Oh, it's not actually about anxiety at all. It's about, that I'm just really tired, whatever it is. So doing that awareness of like digging deeper and moving these things aside, and then that acceptance. So saying out loud to myself in my mind, whatever it is, this is okay. It's not bad. It's not good. A goal that I set for myself this year was to view crying as normal as I view laughter. That doesn't mean that I want to cry as much as I laugh. Obviously, I would much rather laugh. But when I cry or when I feel negative emotions, viewing it the same way that I view laughter, which is just like, this is just happening. You never stop and judge laughter and be like, oh, this is crap, or this is amazing. You just laugh. You just let yourself feel it. So how can I acknowledge and create a relationship with these negative emotions that is as neutral and non-judgmental as my relationship to laughter? And then that action of, sometimes this is more self-reflection of really giving myself the space to dig deep and figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's that there's something more that wants to be felt. It's sometimes that I need to get some anger out. I need to cry. I need to whatever it is. Sometimes it's that I need to have a discussion with someone else. Sometimes it's a decision that I need to make that can really change. So I want to give you 2 examples of how an employer has used this with me. I'm just looking at time. I might just give you one instead. So this employer of mine was at a law firm. He was one of the partners and the owners of a law firm that I worked at. And I worked there when I had been diagnosed with CPTSD, but it was being managed. I was on medication. In general, it was pretty good, but I definitely still had flare-ups, and I understand it well yet. It was pretty early on in my diagnosis. This was at a refugee law firm, so a lot of the cases that we worked on were pretty heavy, a lot of trauma, and that kind of stuff. So the first time it came up was something went wrong with my medication, and all of my symptoms started coming up. And I really felt that not only did I not feel okay being at work surrounded by everyone else, but that I actually didn't feel like I was able to do my job properly. There would be nothing worse than me when I'm feeling panicked and traumatized, going to a room with a client who is traumatized and trying to speak to them. It would only re-traumatize that client. So I needed to speak to him, and I was, excuse the language, but I was shit scared of what was going to happen, because I was like, they'll assume things, they'll tell me I can't work with clients, all of these things. And so I organized a time with him. I told him ahead of time, I need to speak to you about something, but I'm a bit nervous about it. So I gave him that heads up, and he was amazing. So he organized, the meeting was in a private room we had a lot of glass. He organized it in a room that no one else could see into the room. He actually Googled himself things that can help people with PTSD, and he arranged the room so that I could see the door, which meant that I felt safer. That is not a level that most of you have to go to, but I just want to give these examples. And he also asked who I wanted present. So he said there was a female partner of the firm. He asked, would you like to have this discussion with her instead of me? Would you like both of us present? Whatever, and just gave me free reign. He premised our discussion on a personal story. So he actually told me how he, as a legal trainee, had a mental breakdown and had to take a year off legal work. And what this did was create that safety for me, create this circumstance where I knew this person actually understands, maybe not what I'm going through, but I know that they don't judge me for it because they've been through it themselves to some degree. And I think this is a really powerful step when it comes to work relationships or even friendships, is actually like sharing a part of yourself and being vulnerable about times when you've struggled, so that it helps show the other person that they are not this, weird abnormality that no one understands. Okay. So then the awareness step, it was a really open conversation. He asked me lots of questions, but he never questioned what I told him. He trusted every single thing that I told him, but he helped me kind of dig down into what it was that I was actually feeling within the work environment and how this was flaring up within the work environment. The acceptance step, again, was part of that personal story that he told me. And all the way through this conversation and subsequent conversations that happened, he constantly reaffirmed that he saw what I was going through, but he also saw the person that I was and the lawyer that I was underneath all of that, and that was the person that he wanted to help. And then the action plan is, he asked me any steps that I wanted to take. and just respected and accepted every single one of them. And he actually went away and did his own research and came back and made more suggestions. So some of these were that if I was having a day that I was just feeling really on edge, his first suggestion would always be, do you need a day off? And his second thing to do, if I said, no, I don't want a day off, was that he would give me his office. He would physically put me in his office, either with him there or by myself, so that I was away from, my workspace was like this open plan, like pit of noise and people. And so he would take me away and give me a private space so that all I had to worry about was doing my work. He also moved around my work environment so that I could see the entry point from where I was working. So there was no chance of anyone coming up behind me, shocking me, all of these things which are really, really big when it comes to PTSD. So this initial interaction as well created this huge basis of safety moving forward. It made me feel like I could really go to him whenever I felt like I needed anything. If I was having a crappy day, if I needed to just go out and get a coffee, I really felt for the first time that I could be completely honest with him about what was happening and about what I needed. And that in itself meant that the ways that I struggled was so much less. The degree to which I struggled was so much less, because it just removed this, all these additional layers on top of it all. So I've gone over time, but I thought it was important to include that example of what is possible when people do really take this on. Yeah, I would love to open this up for any questions. I have more time. If people do have more time and want to chat, I'm happy to stay on. But yeah, thank you for listening to me. I hope that it's helped in some way. And yeah, thank you.
Ellie, I think I'll start with Mark Cornish, one of our amazing people, club members, has explained it so well. You are an amazing human. And we thank you so much for not only being so open and honest, but you obviously get so much benefit from talking about your experiences and making it real, and in turn that is helping so many people just with that. And from my perspective, you epitomize self-advocacy. It's just incredible what you do, and you know, we're so blessed to have you on board and as part of our network. Sane Australia are an amazing organisation, and you are an amazing person. And you know, as we look to wrap up this session, you know, please help me to thank Ellie. I have given you her contact details. They are in the chat line. If you don't have access to the chat line, shoot me an email and I will forward you Ellie's email contact. But what an amazing person to meet and to have in our lives moving forward.
Thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you so much for having me. And yeah, you know, it's incredibly therapeutic for me to tell my story. And I think that people telling their own story, whatever the hell your story is, even if you haven't, my story can be quite extreme, but even whatever your story is, whether it's mental illness, whether it's some other type of illness, whether it's just, you know, your experience of feeling stressed because of COVID, each of us sharing our stories is the most powerful thing that any of us can do to help others, because it normalizes it. It gives other people, you know, like I said, that safety of what they're going through isn't weird or won't be judged. And that permission, I think permission is so huge and is so close to my heart, of like, when we are true to ourselves and when we tell our stories, we give other people permission to just be true to themselves and do whatever it is that they need.
And in turn, you've instilled that in all of us. This has been recorded, folks, so it will be an amazing PD piece to refer back to and to reflect on, but also share with your own teams and also members. Please, if you do have any questions, send them through to me. I will, and I'll connect you with Ellie. But for now, I think we'll wish you all the very best, and we will certainly be seeing you again really, really soon. Thanks so much, Ellie.
Thank you, and have a beautiful day, everyone. Look after yourselves. Enjoy the 25-kilometre radius.
Happy Monday, everybody. See you.
Bye.